My first ever impression of you is that you're a chill dude running outside VC, living your dream life. Ethan, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thank you. I think I'm a
Let's
chill dude. Sometimes my kids say not. Sometimes they say yes. Well, TBD, I guess.
let's go back to the start of your journey. What was your first real exposure to venture capital? Was it when you realized that there was no money to be made at a banana stand?
No, I don't think I knew what venture capital was. So I did work in the banana stand from Arrested Development when I was about 15. There was no money in it. That's true. I don't think I knew what venture capital was probably until my 20s. I don't think I'd ever heard of it. It wasn't something I was exposed to. Back when I was starting companies, startups weren't even really a word yet. It was kind of in the early days, and so I don't think I knew what venture capital was for a while. Got exposed to it first through Techstars when we were in the first class of Techstars Chicago, and got exposed to some people in venture, and I learned a lot from that point on. But I didn't know about it early in life.
From that point on, all the way till right now, could you talk more about that journey and how you really just decided, like, hey, we're gonna start this fund?
We started this company and we bootstrapped for the first 3 years. We didn't get any venture capital funding at all. We weren't the types of founders that people would normally back. I came straight from law school. My co-founder came straight from a foundation, a nonprofit. We had zero work experience, let alone, neither of us had ever worked in tech or were technical. Back in 2008, you kind of needed those things in order for people to take you seriously. So people didn't take us seriously. We had to bootstrap for 3 years. I worked as a freelance writer, and she was waiting tables, and we kind of built this thing just very scrappy. And we got into the very first class of Techstars Chicago. That opened up doors for us. I like to say it took us from the outside track to the inside track. We had tried pitching investors in the past. We had tried pitching all the investors in Chicago, and we kind of got laughed out of the room. We tried pitching first round capital a couple times. Once I learned about first round capital, I was like, oh, these guys seem great. Got respectful emails, in 2009, 2010, no. The big difference for us was this guy, David Cohen, the founder of Techstars. He came on as an angel investor in 2010. And in 2012, he introduced us to all of these VCs, and he introduced us to first round capital, and he introduced us to Founder Collective. And he took us from what I say from the outside track to the inside track. And that made a huge difference for us. And you realize at some point it's not, the old thing to say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And there's a lot of people out there who are really talented that don't have access to the right connections. And he brought us in and introduced us to the right people who were able to then introduce us to the right people again. And things, expand exponentially and compound from there. It's just a lot easier building from the inside than building from the outside. One of our other lead investors was this guy, Eric Paley, from a firm called Founder Collective. After we built a company for 8 years, we got taken out in year 8 by Facebook, who then built the exact same product. And so that the ending wasn't what we expected after building for 8 years. We sold to GoFundMe, but that's like, it was one of those sales where, the dollar amount isn't disclosed, right? Like, which means like, it wasn't like a good sale. So that outcome wasn't great. And the founder of Techstars, David Cohen, I was talking to all of our investors, and he, was talking to him about like what happened, because it was a surprise. It happened almost overnight, where Facebook basically killed us overnight. And explaining to him, and he's like, would you ever want to work at Techstars? At the time, I didn't really know what I was going to do next. I was been 8 years in a startup and really dealing with like the PTSD and the brain damage of 8 years being in a startup. I left. I went to South America with my wife. We traveled around and backpacked and climbed mountains and read books and did things that, just take some time off from the last 8 years of just like really grinding away at a startup. We did that for about 4.5, 5 months, came back to LA, and, the idea of, I was thinking, should I start another company? I thought about that. I also thought about running a nonprofit for an area that I really cared about, which is mass incarceration and criminal justice reform. And I came really close to taking a role running a nonprofit, teaching entrepreneurship in prisons to max security prisons. And then at the last second, Techstars came back, and that thing that David had said years ago, I guess a year ago at that point, probably, would you ever want to work in venture and, work at Techstars? And they were launching Techstars LA, and it was just random timing, honestly. We had been looking at LA, San Francisco, and Portland, and we ended up in LA, and timing worked out that they were launching Techstars LA, and you recruited me in to help launch Techstars LA. And I got to launch Techstars LA 2017. And then 2 years later, launched Techstars fintech program in Denver. And I fell in love with it. The part I really loved was, I think the four most powerful words in the English language are, I believe in you. At the earliest stages of investing, you get to be a first believer in people when no one else believes, right? Those 3 years when no one else believed in us, those are hard years. And when those first people believed in us, those people to this day, I'm still very close with. They're LPs in my fund now. They're my mentors. They're people I still talk to. I went hiking with one of them just a few days ago, who's been an investor and a believer in me for 17 years. And so those people matter. And I think getting the chance to be one of those people for other founders was something I was really, really drawn to. And I really loved what I was doing at Techstars. I knew I wanted to do it on my own because I'm a founder at heart. And even working for Techstars, which has been like the most impactful organization for changed my life entirely, I knew I was never going to work at a company forever. And I knew I had to do it on my own because I thought I have my own little ways that I want to tweak this and do things a little bit differently. And so eventually I knew I was going to start my own firm. And I got I learned a lot from working at Techstars of like how to be an investor. And then once I'd learned that, I felt I had the knowledge and track record to go out and launch my own thing.
Yeah, and it sounds like you really were just building your startups. You were working on problems to solve, and then you were like, okay, I don't even know what venture capital is, but then somehow when Techstars introduced you to idea, you started to go for funding and stuff like that. But then even after that, it's like you still had to bootstrap for like 3 years and really just like work on yourself, really just like believe in yourself and have people tell you, I believe in you. And, these are the four golden words where it's like, if you don't believe in yourself, then no one will. Because these problems, these issues that you're solving, no one would care until you are successful. So, you definitely grind away at that. And then there's also like the point where it's like you were just a little unlucky where the entire corporation decides to just like duplicate what you guys have worked on for 8 years. And I personally think that could be like soul crushing because just imagine, oh my gosh, it's like you work on something for so freaking long and then you just get it copy and pasted. And they have way more resources, they have way more manpower, and then you guys are probably just like a smaller team, couldn't do really much against it, and then have to force to get it acquired, to get it sold, and that's not the best outcome. But it's just like you were unlucky, but you pushed through it. And then once you pushed through it, you went back to the startups ecosystem. You helped people in Techstars. You just wanted to give back. And at the same time, you're like, okay, so how can I make the most impact? And Techstars is amazing. It's like one of the best out there in the startup ecosystem. And you're like, okay, let me just make sure that I accelerate this process, help start that LA branch, and then help start that Denver branch. So, dude, like, you're freaking amazing. And then even after that, you're like, okay, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. So, I'm definitely going to start my own fund. And, some people say that VC funds aren't like startups, but they really are. Like, they are a company of their own. And the challenges are so, so freaking similar. And it's like, you had these really, really good people who believed in you and you just decided like, hey, I'm gonna do it in my own way. Like there's some stuff that I want to tweak that Techstars can't just change everything for me, so I have to do it myself. So what do? I just start a fund called Outside VC. Could you talk about what was the most difficult part of the transition into, from a founder into Techstars or from Techstars to a VC right now, running a firm of your own?
First off, I want to say you're an extreme. I rambled on for 5 minutes there, and you picked up just about every piece of that story and summarized it in about 30 seconds. So maybe if you can come along to my pitch meetings with LPs, that would be great. And you can summarize my story for them because that would be fantastic. The hardest things of transitioning from founder to VC or founder to Techstars. Let me try and think through that. One of the hard things, I think one of the hard things is like as a founder, in the beginning you're doing everything, right? And then eventually after 8 years or in a team of 40 people and you're delegating a lot, right? And you have and people listen to what you're people in part because like you've been at this role for such a long time and your team believes in you and you can say things and people do them. And then transitioning to a role, when I transitioned to Techstars, I took on a role where everyone was 10 years my junior in the role, really to get a foot in the door into this world. And I took a role where you're an individual contributor, and you took a role where people don't just listen to what you say because you're the founder anymore. And that's a big change, right? From being the guy as the founder to being a guy and just kind of a random guy within a bigger organization that like people don't really like you become a little it's easier to get lost. So I think that's a transition. And then I think a transition, the harder transition, from Techstars to running your own VC firm. I think one of the hardest things is, VC is a lone wolf sport. You're I'm a solo GP. Even at Techstars, you were solo. There was only two people that worked within each program, so it was like small teams. You had your peers who were at other programs, and so you had this community and group of really great people you'd interact with. Um, but at a VC firm, you don't. And I remember one of my mentors and now one of my LPs, who was my MD when I went through Techstars, and I remember asking him. He had run Techstars programs for a long time, and then went on to run a VC firm. And he said the difference, and this stuck with me. He's like, the difference was Techstars is a lot more fun than running in the VC firm. In the sense that Techstars was like, I called it like part VC, part summer camp, and you get to interact with people in a meaningful way over everyone's co-working in the same place together. You're doing silly things, and there's this sense of you get to build this culture, and that's really really fun. And I think the transition from even before, we had this really strong culture when I was running my company and getting to build, and I still like to this day have inside jokes with people from that company. I still interact with them. Like a bunch of them are LPs in my fund, and I just emailed one of them yesterday, set him up with one of our portfolio companies who we might work with. Like I still stay in close contact. Like I think I talked to two people yesterday from my company from 2008, and you still stay in close contact with those people, and you get to build that culture. In a VC firm when you're a solo GP, there's no culture to build. There's no company culture to build. And I think when people talk about, enjoy the journey, not the destination, right? Like part of the journey is getting to do this thing, this really hard thing, and build this culture with these great people around you. And when you're doing it solo as like, and as a VC, you're never going to have a very big team because it's a different business model. And so I knew that going into it, right? And I'm in a different phase of my life where I get to work from home. I have 3 kids. It's nice to be able to step in it in the morning and be done by 5 and be home with the kids. But like that's something you definitely miss is like the culture of building companies is much different than the culture of building VC firms.
It's kind of like the less team members you have, the less things you can really do. So it's like as a solo GP, your fund structure is a little different from other people. Could you talk about maybe like what roles are there in, solo GP funds and what roles usually aren't?
I mean, for someone who's looking to enter into the world of like a venture, like are there roles at solo GP funds? I think those roles are a lot harder. I would, so a solo GP, let's say, is usually going to be most of the time a 25 million or $20 million fund or lower, right? And maybe 50 million, but even so, the budgets that these VC firms have is so much different than joining a fund that might be a couple hundred million or 300 million or 400 million or 500 million or $1 billion plus. Our budgets are just tiny. Like we are tiny little startups. And so there's not usually a lot of space for entry level roles. If I were looking for an entry level role, like in trying to break into VC, I wouldn't look first into like the solo GPs of the world. I would if you were thinking I want to one day start my own firm. I think that's a good like apprenticeship, or you could try and find like internships because you will see all 17 hats that the person is wearing. If you're looking to become like a good investor and not necessarily a good firm owner, then like I think the way in is at a bigger firm where you get to learn from the people around you. People are going to have a bit more time, and you'll get to see things at scale. I think it's hard at a small, really small firm. They just don't usually have the budget to hire entry level folks.
Yeah, and solo GPs, they're a really, really small team, if not just one person. Usually there's probably someone who takes care of the finances side, and then there could be like the chief of staff, which really just like take cares of all the other operations, the special projects, and just like assistant in any way possible. And then there could be like the executive assistant, that really just manages the schedule. Because I know that, I've also talked to a solo GP, Itamar Novik, and
Yeah.
he really just like has every single hour of his day he's just like either talking to founders or just like working on portfolio companies. And it's like solo GPs or even just like VCs in general, it's like they don't have that ideal life of 9 to 5. Could you talk about who is VC not for?
Who's VC not for? VC is not for, it depends on, so like, I'll caveat this with saying small VC is like what I do is very different from large VC. That's like two different worlds entirely. And so it kind of depends on which world you're thinking about. So small VC is not for folks who, I think who are in it for like the glamour. And I think that's true of, you could say that of any job, right? Like if you're doing it for the prestige or something along those lines, it you're going to be sorely mistaken when you get into the role. Small VC is for people who probably have like operated in startups and understand what it is to operate at a very scrappy level and like enjoy the hustle and the grind and the thinking on your feet every day and like the work. And it's for people who enjoy the work. It's not for people who are not self-starters, I would say. Like there's no one, VC in general, there's no one who's who's going to help you learn unless you're proactive. Um, because most VCs, even big ones, tend to be resource constrained and like they're not big organizations. They don't have fully thought out programs most of the time, like a big company would. You're going to have to be proactive in your own education. And, you could go to a big company and there's a training program. At the biggest VC firms, there's probably stuff like that. But I'd say at most, there's not. And so it's it really isn't for people who wait and want to be told what to do. It's better for folks, whether you're small or big VC, it's better for folks who are really proactive and are going to ask a lot of questions and going to absorb and like be a sponge around learning.
Yeah, and it's like small and big VC firms. It's literally the same thing where it's like you have to be a creative person. You have to just keep on asking questions. Really, really be curious. And just like Ethan says, although small VCs, they're I guess more of the pre-seed side. So they are wearing more hats, they're grinding, they are better if you came from a startup background where it's like you already felt that process already. But even in like bigger VC firms, Ethan says that there really aren't just like these training programs that are fully fleshed out. It's really just like, hey, can you bring in the money or can you bring in the deal flow? And if you can do that, then let's just get you on the ground hitting next day. And then that would be it. And even in these bigger VC funds, now they're converting into like RIAs where it's like they can invest in different assets. So there are more roles that are coming in. But even then, it's just like you have to be a really creative and curious person in the venture industry. Ethan, can you talk about how you hire a creative and really just like people who are curious to learn and cool people like Loki? What are the ways?
Uh, Loki, that was a great one. That was a throwback. I don't know. I don't know where and how you're digging in. Like your research is going and plumbing the depths of the internet to find these little things. Loki was one of our employees at Give Forward, who was an amazing human who grew ghost peppers and square watermelons and would eat hot chicken wing contests and win them. So he was just an exceptional human. I miss Loki. How do you find these people? I think sometimes these people find you. I think I think the best ones are proactive. And sometimes I'll give in, the early bird always kind of gets the worm. And if you can kind of cut the line, you cut the line. Because anytime someone opens up an associate role at a VC firm and it goes onto LinkedIn and you get 1,000 applications within a day. And what are you going to do with 1,000 applications? Do you keep that open for a week and have 7,000 applications? And um, it's just hard to cut through the noise. And so if you can cut through the noise before the flood of applicants, the people I've hired, they reached out to me ahead of time and they said like, yeah, I'd love to work. I'd love to work with you. That's a lot easier when you're one of 5 people that are doing that than one of 5,000 that have waited until the application opens. That's what I would say. Like, don't be part of the masses. Like, most what happens is like an application is going to open. Maybe people look at the first 300, like they're overwhelmed by the next 3,000. And so, like, you don't even get seen. So I would be proactive in your approach and not do the same thing that everyone else is doing, which is applying when you're supposed to apply.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. It's like, when you get so much applications, heck, maybe you post it on LinkedIn. And then what an ideal candidate should do is really like obviously send in their application, but also like DM, you in all channels and really just make sure that you have got their attention, you've got the hiring manager's attention, so you can reach the key decision maker, and showing that you can really reach these people shows that you know how to get to the best way possible and really just like creatively solve things. Yeah.
I think that shows also how you're going. Like, if you're going to be an associate at a VC firm, there's a couple of things that are common. Like, one of the things they're going to look for you to do oftentimes is sourcing. And like the same creativity you use to get a job is the creativity you'll use to get in front of a founder or help close a founder, convince a founder that take the firm's money. And so like I think that showing rather than telling is great. And like, maybe you annoy the VC because you go overboard, but the reality is they were going to say no anyway. So there's no real risk in doing that. Like if you build a reputation of being annoying, I mean, I don't think that's even possible. Most VCs don't talk to each other enough to be like that's never going to happen. I do think doing everything you can to even be noticed is critical because the default is going to be no if you're not.
Like Ethan says, it's like VCs obviously talk to each other, but they don't talk to each other that much. Where they're like, okay, let's just compare candidates and let's just try to hire the best out of like, I don't know, 5,000, whatever. So it's really just like you got to be really proactive. And, VCs are busy. So, like, Ethan, he's probably doing like so much things at a time. So he's not going to look through like 5,000 applications. That's just not going to happen. Maybe the first 50, and if they're not good, then move on to the next 50. But it's just gonna be like the people who are fast, the people who are proactive. Could you talk more about what you do in a day or a week as a VC?
Sure. I think as a VC, it depends on where you are. So if you're a regionally based VC, if you only invest in Chicago companies or New York companies or LA companies, you're probably going to be meeting folks more in the city, right? You might become a professional coffee meeting taker. And if you're not regionally focused, like we invest in fintech and climate globally, you become a professional. I am what I would say a professional emailer. I spend 50% of my time on email, to some degree on WhatsApp and text messages, and that's messaging with perspective founders you're talking to who are in pipeline of like companies you might invest into. You're talking to your existing portfolio founders and helping them with their requests, right? And that becomes, as your portfolio grows, that becomes an increasingly large percentage of your job. And you're communicating. I have 180 LPs. So those are my investors into the fund. Like, so VCs have investors themselves. Like that's where we get our capital from. And you're interacting with them. And when you're fundraising, it kind of flips and you're interacting with them more than anyone else, right? Is LPs. But that's, I'd say, like at least half the day is just email and communications. And then another quarter, let's say, is Zoom meetings. And those are oftentimes with founders, who are pitching you, or, it could be other VCs to compare notes on stuff, or service providers. And so there's that. And then there's, other buckets of stuff. Like there's the job of, when you're a small VC like me, it's running a small business. There's all the things of the admin and accounting and your banking staff, and like just all of the stuff of like actually running the business, having to run payroll or all sorts of things like that. Just back office stuff. That's, I'd say, like a lot of it. Most of it isn't glamorous. Most of it isn't like, the stuff that seems really fun. But I think if you break it down, there's a lot of different aspects of it. There's top of funnel, like building, like you have to build a brand, like so that people recognize your firm. You have to figure out channels for marketing, whether that's building a personal brand on social media, whether that's putting together programmatic functions so that you have pitch contests or things like that. Like how are people going to find you? And are you going out into the community and going to, pitch contests and there, like how are people going to find you? Like you have to be a good marketer. And then there's the aspect of the role of like picking companies and like how do you diligence them, and like who do you call? Who are you going to talk to find out if this company is good? Those are kind of like, you have to win the company. You have to convince them to take your money versus other people's. A lot of it is spent really in communication with those folks. That's, I think, the main role you have as an investor. And then communicating out with your investors. And just like founders send monthly updates, I send a monthly update to all my investors, and then a quarterly update. And then you have ad hoc messages from all your investors who might want to introduce you to so-and-so or another company or whatever. So you're constantly in communication. I think if you like communicating with people, it's a great job. If that drains you, it's going to be a hard job.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned that is really important is really just maintaining that relationship. And you mentioned like VCs don't usually do as much as you, I guess, where you just like do like monthly reports to your investors, your LPs, and to your people. And it's like people don't do as much to maintain that relationship as you do. And from what I've seen, even your LPs are kind of like open on LinkedIn saying like, hey, I'm an LP at this fund. Like they really trust you. They love your brand and they want to be a part of it. Like what are other main ways that you really maintain that relationship with these LPs besides like staying over every time you travel?
Uh, I stay at my LP's houses when I travel. In part because it's way more fun, and in part because I have a tiny little budget. But the way I've tried to get in front of it, I have 180 LPs, which is an unusual amount. Most firms of this size do not have that many LPs, and that was by design and necessity. My LPs, there's like 30 VCs in the fund, who are GPs at other funds, which provide sources of downstream capital to our founders. We have a lot of operators and founders, probably 100 plus CEOs or founders are LPs in the fund. And so they act almost as this angel community of people who are willing to help our portfolio founders, and like this first level network of people who can help. Like, so today someone asked, they need help with like, they're a B2B company, but they're trying in this B2C channel. And like, I was able to connect them to one of our LPs who runs like a marketing shop. And so, so I have a lot of LPs. And so the way I've tried to stay in front of it is never, and I think this is true of startups, anytime you're quiet, people think there's something wrong. And so I've tried to stay in front of it by doing the monthly updates. And I think that's been the most critical, is just kind of keeping people informed. And so I wouldn't be able to, I'd get drowned if people were asking me what's going on with the fund, what's going on. And so I don't give them the chance to ask, right? Because I give them an update every month and they come to expect it. It comes the same date every month. It never misses. That's the most critical thing. I think the best startup founders do the same. I think that's such a good skill for startup founders to do as well. But outside of that, I'll do meetups in different cities with our LPs. So, probably 4 or 5 times a year, I'll go to a different city. We'll all get together and have a lunch or a breakfast. The LPs love that because they get to meet each other and they get to hang out with each other, and they start to, build bonds with each other. I was just staying in DC with one of my LPs, and another one of my LPs who they didn't know before that lives only a block away. And now, like, I was there this past week. We had dinner. One of them came over to the other one's house, and now their kids are in t-ball together, and like now they're buddies. So connecting people in real life, I think, is something that's also been really helpful to stay in front of those things. But those are like the main things, is like trying to stay in front of them from a communication standpoint, so they're never wondering what's going on with outside VC.
Yeah, and for our audience, like Ethan says, if you have a personal connection with a person and you want to maintain that relationship, all you have to do is really just send them actually monthly updates, maybe even quarterly updates. As in, like, I personally try to maintain relationships by sending like a quarterly newsletter or something like that, just to keep in touch. And I also have a pretty good brand around like LinkedIn, just like Ethan. Like, we are both kind of building our brands on LinkedIn as well, just to make sure that, like, we haven't gone quiet. So nothing has, gone wrong. And it's like, you have to let people be there in the journey with you. And that is the best way to do it. And along that journey, like Ethan kind of said, he actually connected people. And that's the second most important point, where if you connected people and they stay in touch, then basically what happens is that now you are forever, you have that relationship without even having to do much at all, when they basically just like do all the heavy work to maintain that relationship, and you can just, have on it. And that's the best part. Could you talk about, when you invest in people and invest in startups, what is the top three things that you look for?
Yeah, I think, and I invest at such an early stage, is going to be different for everyone. So there's no top three things to look for. Every investor is going to have different criteria. But, I look heavily into the team. We invest at the earliest stage, and you don't just invest in teams. Like, we talk about teams a lot. At Techstars, we used to say we invest in 6 things, and it was, the first one was team, and the second one was team, and the third one was team, and the fourth one was market size, and then product and traction. And I have a pretty similar formula today of what I look for. Um, but I'd say, like, I do look at team heavily, because so many of these companies, and you talk to the best investors and they'll tell you, even these people who have invested in all these unicorns, if you're investing at the earliest stage, you're going to get them wrong a lot. And what you can control for is team and entry point. Like, entry point is price, right? Like, if you're paying $25 million to come into a company and it exits for 500 million, that's not that great of a multiple. If you paid 5 million to come in and it exits at 500 million, it's a pretty good multiple. And so, like, taking that risk before other people are willing to take that risk, really, it puts it back all on that team of, do I believe in this team to be able to navigate the pivots and navigate when they go wrong? Because inevitably, a lot of the best ideas that we invest in are the wrong ideas in the right team. And so I put a lot of emphasis on team. And it can't just be team, though. Like, I don't think I've ever invested in a company. There's probably one or two maybe, but like, it's not frequent. When you invest in a company that's only based on the team, you also really have to love the idea, or at least believe that the idea can be really big. And I think it's hard to get there otherwise. But that's really more preference. Do I like this versus, I don't spend that much time investing in like someone's TAM and saying like, is this TAM big enough? Usually it is. And then the reality is like TAMs expand and markets expand. And the things that started off as weird ideas that didn't seem fundable, in the beginning often become big companies. And like if you look at them and you say this isn't a fundable or VC fundable company, the reality is like people build small niches and then expand out from there. And yeah, Jeff Bezos was going to start online books, and now Amazon sells literally everything. Like there's nothing that they don't sell, right? And they have businesses beyond just you know, selling stuff, right? They're AWS is like a huge driver of their revenues, and so like I don't focus too much on that. I focus on, are these people really passionate about what they're doing? Are they like gritty, and like are they willing to stick around and do this? And do they think and operate differently than I see other founders? Do they approach the world differently? I think if you have conventional thinking, you're going to have conventional results. And so I look for people who are just doing things differently. It doesn't mean they're doing things better. It means they're doing things differently. They could be wrong and they could fail spectacularly. But if you're doing things differently, I think it often means you're going to have different results.
Yeah, and it's like TAM doesn't really matter to much of an extent when you're investing in pre-seed because the
Yeah.
founders are just gonna pivot anyways. Like there's no way the most common I say like average amount of pivots is probably like 8 to 10. Could be even more now
Maybe it
that
is.
it's like everyone is coming into the startup space. But it's like TAM it's important, but it's not like up there. So like Ethan says, team, that's the top three. And then it's like market and traction. Traction is really important, but timing is important as well. Where even, there's probably been like tens of startups that have done it in last year and last year or 10 years ago. But then you just come in at the right timing and then you hit it. And that is like something that's the craziest thing, but it works. And that is why even though, we've got these giants like Salesforce, AWS, or eBay, or whatever, they are still like they have competition, as in like startups are their competition as well. Where if they don't really maintain that dominance, then they are not gonna have it. So it's like startups have huge potential, and that's why Ethan always invests in the team. Could you
Yeah.
talk about maybe like one or two stories of successful investments and how you met the founder, why you decide to invest?
Sure. Um, I'll talk about, well, how about I'll talk about the last investment we made. The last investment we made is a company called Bond, and they're helping Gen Z pick out credit cards and figure out credit products, and then they manage their credit, like they help them boost their credit score in the background without them doing anything. And so like everyone always knows there's we're not a very financially literate country or world, right? And that's true across income levels. You could be the bottom of the pyramid, or you could be the top of the pyramid, and most people aren't that good at managing their own money. And so with AI, what if you didn't have to think about that anymore? What if you didn't have to learn about all the things you should know about managing your credit, and your credit worked on autopilot in the background to be building itself? Wouldn't that be cool? That's what this team is doing. I got introduced to them through one of our LPs who's a partner at a Series A stage venture capital firm. They couldn't do this company. This company is doing, a pre-seed round. And, we invested in them. The founders were, I don't, I don't, I don't think it's critical always, but in this case, the founders had really strong founder market fit. One of the founders had previously built what was essentially Credit Karma for Asia, took it public for $1 billion on the Hong Kong exchange, built it for 15 years. Previously, it helped build the FICO score, like had a lot of domain experience in this space. And normally, when I see companies and founders that have built $1 billion companies, I actually tend to avoid them. And the reason for that is, well, I know a lot of founders have built $1 billion companies, like lots. I don't know very many who've ever built two. And usually, there's a reason for that. It takes a lot of lightning in a bottle to make a startup work. You can be really smart and work really hard. All the things have to break to get to $1 billion company, and it's hard to do it again. And there's no model for that. the second reason I don't usually invest is like you pay a premium to invest in those founders again. The same way I think, in Major League Sports, someone built their career and had a great career. Their contract comes up for free agency, and someone overpays dramatically for that player, and they're paying for the last 10 years of that player's career when the next 5 years are going to be half the results that person did before. And you're paying for past performance. And so I usually don't invest in those types of founders. Um, I did in this case because I found that one of the founders, and both the founders were incredible. Both of them had done pretty incredible things in their career. But I was worried that the one founder was going to be not that motivated. They'd already taken a company public. But what I found from them was that he was so scrappy. And I met him at a house of one of my LPs. And one of my LPs he's in his 20s. He's a startup founder himself. He was having people over to his house, all these startup founders, and just like we ordered in takeout, nothing fancy, just this like little, not a hacker house, but like, just his little house in Silicon Valley. And it was just all these founders. And the person who I invested in was probably 15 years older than most of the people there, at least, right? Maybe 20 years older than most of the people there. He had experienced it, and he loved it so much that he, is pairing up with my LP to do these events in the future for more people, right? And they pitched in a pitch competition, um, and they won the pitch competition. And he called me up or like texted me or emailed me at like 10 p.m. to let me know that they won a pitch competition, even though they've built a company that went public before. That's the type of founder I love, the person who's in it for the right reasons. And he's just hungry. He wants to do this again. He wants to win. He's not, I've made my money. I've had my success. I'm going to sit on the sidelines. And when the going gets tough, I'm going to call a day. Like he's in it to take this across the finish line again. And I think that was important for me because I think these things are hard and no one gets them right in the beginning. And the people that stay in it long enough, those are the ones who end up with big bank accounts.
Yeah, and it's like, all these big funds are paying like premiums for, hey, OpenAI, an employee left, wanted to start a new company, 2 billion. And then it's just like they pay so much, but the risk of really getting to a billion is not just like skills. Now, obviously, they are in the top 1%, 0.1% of skills, but still like probably like at least 50% of that is also luck in a way where it's like they probably just pivoted and then the market responded. And it's kind of like meta in a way where it's like meta kind of thought that they can control the market and just like go into the metaverse, but then it didn't really happen. Like the market didn't receive it, and they just kind of just fell out even though they spent so much money. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like most of it is kind of luck in a way. I mean, heck, you met these people and you've actually did that deep dive process where it's like they would send that email and they would update people at like the end of the day, at night. And it's like if someone has really given up, just want to take a chill life, then they probably won't do that.
And so I like investing in founders with chips on their shoulders. I invest in a lot of immigrant founders, and like immigrants have taken the biggest risks of like moving, like starting a new company seems risky, but not as risky as lifting up your entire family and coming to a new country with a new language with nothing, or like maybe coming to a new country where you had a professional job in the country you came from, and like none of your credentials transfer over and you have to start at the bottom. I think people with a chip on their shoulder, I think it's a good thing because I think this is the people that run through walls to make these things work are the ones who win in startups. Um, and so I can't say in particularly like what was why they wanted to do this again. But I will say if you don't have that hunger, if you don't have that drive, it's never going to work. So I kind of look for what is, what is that drive? What is that hunger? What is driving people? I think it is really important.
Yeah, and VCs can really see that right away, which is why, the first 5 minutes they already know whether they're going to invest in you or not. Looking ahead in venture capital, what trends are you excited about? Outside VC is just like you said, They're betting on outsiders, maybe on immigrant founders that's building fintech infrastructure and products that will really lift these like 100 million people to middle class over the next decade. So, what do you think is really being overlooked right now?
Yeah, I think something that no one has done in VC for the last decade is consumer. So if you look at the biggest companies from 20 years ago, you look at the Ubers, you look at the DoorDashes, you look at the Facebooks, like the last generation, 2 generations ago of companies, every company, all the biggest wins were consumer. All of these firms built their brands on consumer companies. Like the biggest VC firms built their brands on consumer companies. Hard to build a brand on a B2B company. Even if it's a multi-billion-dollar company, no one's heard of it. Right. And so all the biggest VCs built their brands betting on consumer. And then for the last decade, consumer became unfundable. There was no one, you couldn't back consumer because there was no downstream capital for it. Everything has been B2B, SaaS, enterprise. That's where VC and startups have been for the last decade. And James Curry at NFX wrote a great piece on this. And he's talking about the opening of tech windows and the idea that consumer now, because of LLMs and because of AI and because of where we are in the world today, that consumer has an opportunity to come back, right? Agentic AI, like the company I just talked about, 4 of our last 5 deals are AI native investments and AI native companies. And like this company is building a modern version of Credit Karma, but AI native. And like it completely changes the game when your money's on autopilot, right? It's self-driving money. And that wasn't possible a few years ago. And so what I'm excited about, I've mostly invested in B2B from this fund, and mostly from when I was at Techstars, it was mostly B2B too. I think that James is right. And I think that the door has reopened for some of the biggest companies of the next decade to be consumer again, because everything will be rewritten on these new platforms, which didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. So I don't know if LPs have caught up with that yet in the same way that some founders have, and it's hard to know where if there'll be capital to invest there. But I think we'll see more and more consumer coming back. It might start off slow, but we'll see it coming back over the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, and it's like just imagine the potential of, when you go to AI, maybe AI would just like kind of replace the Google search engine where it would just like suggest stuff for you to just buy right away, pull up all the reviews, everything, literally everything possible, and then you can just make that choice automatically instead of just like thinking of, hey, should I do this? Should I do this? What's the best price on that and that? And one of our previous guests, Itamar, is actually he actually has some similar thoughts where he's right now, I think he's actually giving like 100K no hustle checks to consumer businesses. So it's like $1 million or something like that. And he can see the niche. Like he can see that this has huge potential.
Mm-hmm.
So I 100% agree with you, Ethan. I know you talked a bit about how to break into VC for our viewers who needs an actionable plan to break in 6 months. What would be your plan? Maybe for ex founders who wants to start their own fund.
I can think of 2 plans. One for like someone who's not necessarily thinking of starting their own fund. Like, so let's say I could think of that too. Just thinking of someone who's just trying to break into like a first role, into like an associate role in venture. If you're to do month by month, I would say like the very first thing that I would do would be I would be coming up with my plan and my story and like what is it that you want to do and figuring out what your story is, because if you don't have a differentiated story, you're not going to stand out. So I'd be thinking about that plan and I'd try and craft how do all the things in my career so far lead up to this point, and can I weave a narrative into why I'm going into VC, and not just VC, but I try and be specific around like what type of VC, what sector, like maybe it's climate, maybe it's deep tech, maybe it's consumer AI. What are the things that have led me up to here that make me different? And I'd work on coming up with that narrative of telling that story. Now, it's such a hard job to get into that like you can't just say I'm going to work for a deep tech AI, AI fund. The jobs just don't open up. So like you have to be a little bit adaptable, but I would figure out who my ICP is, who's my top firms, and like what do they have, and then what do I have that make me attracted to them. That's how I think about like fund one. I think, or month one, like month two, like, and I don't know if the order of operations here is correct. Like, I am not an expert on this. I'm just kind of coming up with my own ideas. So like maybe the month ordering is not right here, but here are some of the big things I think about. Is this next one's hard? I think controversial. It's like I'd pick a city. I don't think it's easy to get a job in VC if you live in Madison, Wisconsin, or Washington D.C., or lots of different places that are great cities and have decent startup ecosystems. I think oftentimes cities will have greater ecosystems, startup ecosystems, than they have VCs. The VC ecosystems in the cities will be smaller than the startup ecosystems themselves. And so I would say, and this is maybe controversial, but like pick a city. And usually that's going to mean San Francisco or New York. And I'd think about moving to that city. If you're going to go for it, I think you really got to go for it. Three, I would say I'd spend months. I'd start networking. Going back to what we said earlier about if you get 3,000 applications, you're not looking at them beyond application 300. So the way people get jobs, unfortunately, is always still through network. And so I'd start talking to associates at those firms and say like, hey, I'm trying to break in, or give me 10, would you be open to 10 minutes? If you build rapport with those associates know what jobs are open. And especially they know what jobs are going to be open because they're sometimes looking to do lateral moves and they have an idea of what's going to happen, or they just know the gossip, I would say, before it happens and before it shows up on LinkedIn. Once it's on LinkedIn or once it's on a job post, I don't want to say it's too late, but it's a lot harder. So I would start talking to the associates ahead of time in the city that you want to be in, and build rapport with them. And maybe they'll tell you about jobs that are opening up, and ask them how they broke in and just start to build relationships with them. And then, I'd say for like month 4, I think, and this is probably true of all jobs, but especially in venture, is I think you got to do the job before you have the job. So how are you, again, it goes to like, how are you going to stand out? How are you proactive? Why is someone going to hire you? If you're an associate, I think people are oftentimes looking for a couple things. Like, can you source companies, right? Can you be out on the street, right? A VC might be in her 50s. I have a family. Like, I can't be out going to every event every night. But if you're an associate, maybe you can. Maybe you can represent the firm out into the community, and not just going to other events. If you can start creating your own events, if you can plan monthly dinners with founders and create events where you become the node in the community, that's really valuable. Other things I think that would be valuable, creating an audience. Like, you have a podcast, start your own podcast, start something where you build an audience that you're able to leverage for the VC firm. That's an asset. Or start to get really, really good with AI tools, right? Like, what if you could operationalize and bring some of those skill sets to the VC firm who, for the most part, are probably laggards when it comes to, compared to startups, of course, of using AI tools. What if you could bring some of that knowledge to the VC firm, and they could, instead of having a team of 2, now they have what feels like a team of 6 because of all these AI agents that you've opened up for them. Where can you add value and do that job before it's your paid job? That's something I think that will be really valuable. Month 5, I'd start applying for those jobs, and I'd look for the warm intros, like the relationships you've built over time with the associates that you've met. I'd be asking them for help, and anytime something opens up, I'd be the first one to apply, and I'd ask for a warm intro from the folks that you've been meeting, over the last few months. And then step 6, I think in month 6, I'd move to the city. And that's hard to do before you have a job. That's disruptive, that's challenging. But I think if you're going for it, you're going to have better luck. There's so few of these jobs and they're so hard to get. I think you'd be really doing yourself a disservice if you don't give it your all, and that means probably moving to where the jobs are.
And how about on, obviously most people wouldn't have such a great network as you, or they probably just don't know people. But for the people who kind of know someone, maybe even institutional family offices, what would their 6 month plan be to start a fund?
Just
Mhm.
starting your own fund is an entirely different beast than getting a first job at a VC fund. It is the limiting factor in starting the fund is fundraising. Um, that is the thing that's going to kill off most funds. Um, and so the way I would approach it, and I did it in a weird way that is atypical. Most funds do not have 180 LPs. Again, that was part strategic because they had so much value to the fund, and part necessity. I didn't have someone I could go to. Like my friend, he just emailed me. He's starting a fund. He had a successful exit. Then he was a partner at a VC firm, and now he's partnering with someone who's built, and that person is going to be, the sole GP in $100 million fund. That's the way I would do it. If you have that person in your life, find that person and who can be the sole GP. Most people don't, right? That's like a hard, like that's just not a path that a lot of people have. But what I would do if fundraising is the limiting factor, I would look for some version of that. And maybe it's not going to be a sole GP or a sole LP in your fund who puts forth all the capital. But I would look while you still have a day job, while you're still getting paid, while you still have a salary, I'd be figuring out what can be um, your anchor investor. And an anchor investor is the same as like in startup language, that would be your lead investor, where every founder has been in the situation where they get all of these smaller checks and angel investors and all these people that say, yeah, I'm in, but once there's a lead, and you have all this money that's sitting there once there's a lead. It's very true in raising a venture capital firm as well. It's hard to build momentum unless or until you have this anchor, and things go a lot faster. So I would be looking on the sidelines while I have a full-time job for anyone that could be, and that could be past corporation I worked for if they're big enough, or folks I've built relationships with, if I'm in, partnerships with, like who could that be? And I try and identify that. Outside of that, I think if you depends on how long your investing track record is. The other thing people are going to want to know as you're fundraising is like, well, it's a blind pool. I'm investing into this person. There's no product here. It's just a person. I have to trust this person. Does this person have a track record of success? If you haven't been investing heavily, I think it's hard to, it's hard to raise a fund. But at least a year or two in advance of when you want to do this, I don't think it's a 6 month thing. I think you should start investing little checks, $1,000 checks, whatever, and build a track record of investing into startups. It could be tiny checks, but you can then leverage that track record. It's very, very hard to get people to trust you if you have no track record. And so I'd start putting money to work, even if it's small amounts. Dollar amount is almost irrelevant. Just showing people that you can source companies, that you can win allocation, and to a lesser extent that you can help the companies. Those are two things I would be thinking about. That would be like how to build that narrative around like I can actually do this job, and how to get over the hump of fundraising, which, you could try going the route I did, which is pure insanity. It's worked out great because I got there, but it's insanity to do. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily to other folks because it's a crazy way of approaching it. I would look for a few bigger checks if that's possible.
Yeah, and like Ethan says, it's all, fundraising. If you raise the funds, everything else just like comes naturally. And for our previous guesses, there's actually VCs who really just like try to build the entire thing, that infrastructure of the fund for an entire year without even realizing like, hey, am I actually gonna receive the funds from the LPs or not? It's like they had it, they built it, and then, the LPs could say like, hey, okay, I guess we trust you enough with your track record and the progress you've made, and then, let's just invest in you. Obviously, like your way is just absolutely insane. Is it? So are they just like investing your LPs? Are they just investing like 10K checks, or does this usually happen?
Does not usually happen. It's not a normal way to do things. Normally, there's for funds that are 12 million or smaller, you can have up to 250 LPs. The SEC has limits normally. That's normally like a 99 LP limit, and there's ways to build around those limits. There's something called parallel funds that allow you to build around some of those limits. The limiting factor is there's this idea of like Dunbar of like there's only 150% of people you can stay in close communications with. It becomes a you just become so bandwidth constrained by having that many LPs that it's really hard to a $10,000 LP takes as much time sometimes to land as a $500,000 LP, and so the idea is like if you have the ability to spend time on landing the $500,000 LPs, it's just a better use of your time. Um, it's not is I would say it's atypical to do things the way. I think the average check size was like 40K. But we also had like $5,000 LPs, anywhere from like 5,000 to 100 or 500,000, in that first fund. But a lot of $5,000 LPs, and a lot of those have ended up being some of the most valuable. So like I wouldn't discount it if but it takes a lot of energy and effort. Like if I don't write those monthly updates, do those $5,000 LPs become pretty useless? Probably. It's getting those LPs in and then keeping them engaged has been like what's worked for me. If I just send a quarterly update to them, I think all of this would fall apart.
Yeah, and that's the really great brand that you've built, and the reason why you must like at all costs continue LinkedIn and also like in person as much as you do. And it's a lot of traveling as well, I guess, because you want to really deepen that in person relationship. But then at the same time, you have an amazing online brand where it's like every single day or maybe every 2 days, people can stay updated to your journey, not just like the monthly updates. So it's like your online brand could be like your personal brand, your personal journey, and then your quarterly or your monthly can just be like your hey, I'm telling you that we need so and so, and we need this and that, and if you can help, then yeah, help out, and it has just worked out so well for you. Um, Now for a few rapid fire questions to wrap up, a few words or a sentence. Ready?
Sure. Yeah.
If you could invest in any startup from the past, which one would it be?
I would invest in Apple.
What is your favorite part of working in VC?
The relationships.
Now that you're moving to Santa Barbara, what is one thing that you will miss the most about Denver?
The mountains.
What is one thing most people don't know about you and you can share?
I might have a decently uh, loud online presence, but I'm quite probably I don't know if I'd say introverted, but shy or in person.
Yeah. Is there any thoughts that you want to finish or we didn't cover on this pod that you would like to talk about?
I would just say if people are thinking about getting into venture or they're thinking about getting into anything, a magnet that my old co-founder had on her refrigerator was just said leap and the net will appear. And I think going back to being proactive and just 80% of life is just showing up. And most people aren't going to even do the thing. Most people aren't going to post on social media, right? Like 99% of people don't. And there's an advantage, a strong advantage to the people who take those steps. They don't have to be the smartest people in the world. They just have to be relatively smart within that tiny group of people who took the leap. And so most people never take the leap. And we look at the people who build things and we think it's because they're so smart or they had brilliant ideas. Most of the time, it's just they put themselves out there. And so I would say, like, leap and the net will appear. There's no guarantee of success of any of these things, but you never know until you take that shot.
Yeah, and it's just like founding journey in a way where it's like you ship something out and you just keep shipping things out until the market responds. And when the
Yeah.
market actually responds, then that is great. But if you just keep falling in love with your product, then obviously that's good because you're just building it more deeply. But there's no revenue to be made. You're just gonna be strapped. There's no point, in my opinion. But it's really just putting yourself out there, like Ethan says, And once you really put yourself out there, the environment that you put yourself in and the people that you trust and know will respond. That was amazing, Ethan. For anyone listening who wants to learn more about you or your firm, what is the best place to reach you?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn at Ethan Austin on LinkedIn. I'd say that's probably the best place to reach me.
Yeah, and I'll put his LinkedIn in the description below. Thank you again, and thanks to everyone who's listening. Comment a question you want to hear. And if you enjoyed this episode with Ethan, make sure you press the subscribe button, like, and share with someone who's interested in getting into venture. We'll see you next time on Break into VC.